Welcome to New Realities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and tonight's program is a very exciting addition to what I feel is the unfolding of new realities, which is the future. Tonight we'll be talking about a panel that some of us attended here, which was Global Futures 2045, where people came together to propose a possible future based on technology, consciousness, and spirituality.
The main aim of the Congress is to discuss how to evolve, how can our physical body evolve and how can consciousness evolve. It is very important because now we're facing the time where unconscious evolution period has almost finished, and we come to the new era when new period of controlled human evolution can happen.
This panel tonight is sort of a tribute to that. Let me just introduce everybody around the panel. I have my good friend Una O'Regan, who's an information technology person. She's studied a lot of the Kurzweil singularity approaches to where we might be coming as we merge biology and technology. Thank you, Una, for being here. I have next to me right here Dr. J.J. Hertog, longtime guest on the show. He is a linguist, he is a philosopher, he is a mystic. His experiences of higher states of consciousness have opened up doorways to really unfolding a new way of looking at the world. His most well-known book is the Keys of Enoch, Book of Knowledge, which I highly recommend. Thank you for being here, Dr. Hertog. And then I have to my right here is Stuart Mason Bambrock, who is a futurist. I think, Stuart, you're coming from a sort of technological possibilities of the future. Would you call that?
But also based in science and what we know today that can be looked at as a precursor. Right? So it's based on what we know now and how we can...
Okay, let's pick up on that after I introduce Dr. Desiree Hertog. She has a PhD in environmental science. She's had some amazing experiences in bringing the higher spiritual worlds into the physical world and being a kind of interpreter of those realities. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
So I think if we start off with what Stuart was just saying, which was, what was that? I knew it caught my attention, but it was interesting.
I like to try to bridge two worlds. That is, science provides a window behind the curtain of physical reality.
Okay.
Right? But science without imagination, as Einstein said, paraphrasing, Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge. So we amass scientific knowledge, but without imaginations, we don't venture past what's possible. Yeah. And we get stuck in thinking that what we know now is what we're always going to know. Right. And you look back in history, and it's always been that way. Yeah.
Right. So that's why I call this program New Realities, because so your book, your concept was the unimaginable. What did you say? Yeah,
that was the title of one of the segments on my show, Critical Thought TV. Shameless plug. That's okay. With Ben Goertzel, AGI researcher, and we called it Imagining the Unimaginable.
Okay, like what, for instance?
Specifically, we were looking at what artificial and general intelligence might be like in a transbiological species in a highly speculative far future.
Wait, transbiological means what?
Means that it's a life form, but is beyond biological.
It's robotic? What does it?
It's a substrate that we don't have access to now. I mean, it's very, very far future.
Wait, Desiree.
Yeah, although we're getting there, I have to say.
Wait, we're getting where, though? I'm already lost in the future.
What our friend Stuart is saying is that from where we are now, we can predict certain possibilities of the future. And I think this is what's interesting. We're not coming in from abstract concepts that mean nothing. We are starting to develop what we would call AI, or artificial intelligence. We're starting to also see how perhaps organs could be implanted into our body so we can live to not only 120 years, which they're expecting, but almost like the movie, that you can live to 200 years.
Or thousands of years.
And in a sense, ultimately, that even the brain itself could be augmented in certain ways. You know, right now, what's so exciting, there's car companies, and they're giving some of their workers this kind of biological device that they put on their arm, so that when they're repetitively like hitting something or moving something, this device actually gives them more power, so it's not all from them.
It's like a bionic arm.
It's a bionic arm, and it's just strapped to them. It's not a big deal or anything. That's just the beginning.
Yeah.
So is that
it's just the beginning. I just wanted to be clear that what Ben and I were talking about was arbitrarily, and I mean way beyond the singularity, way beyond the implications of what we're talking about right now, and even what GF 2045 was talking about. It was talking about an AGI that transformed its own substrate, its own material, into an artificial black hole. And was in communication with others. I mean,
I'm not sure about an artificial black hole. But let me just hear from Una, because she was just at the Global Conference 2045. Ray Kurzweil was there. But what did you?
Well, I think, and to touch on your point with regard to the arm there, and the the arm becoming part, or being pushed out and actually becoming stronger. I think Kurzweil, his whole idea with the singularity is biology meeting technology, and either replacing it, which will be in the future, or for now, supporting it a little bit. So that was Kurzweil's idea with the singularity, and well, he sensationalized it. There was people before it that actually spoke about it, obviously. But what I like is Dmitry Iskov's
who
idea.
Tell people who Dmitry is.
Well, I just recently, got up to speed with Dimitri's concepts. He ran the conference over the weekend. And what I like about Dmitry is that he breaks everything into a very simple, actionable plan. So over the next 30 years, he has this, 4-step process.
You lay them out for us, and then we'll pick up on it.
Okay. So if I can remember, the first step is really this idea of just creating an avatar-type body, which I think we're there already. I think we've all seen that, there are avatars out there, and that's been possible. Then the second step would be supplying the brain, connecting it to the avatar and actually replenishing the brain and keeping the brain alive. So the lifespan of the brain could essentially be longer than the lifespan of the body, right, if it was on its own, supported by an avatar. So this idea of life extension would be possible then. And then thirdly would be this idea of replacing the brain completely. So actually replacing the brain and transferring consciousness. And then finally, I think he talks about hologram images. And like actually dissipating the body and becoming a hologram.
You say we are already there in terms of avatars. Yeah. Could you expand on that, please?
Well, at the conference you were at as well, there was a gentleman there, and he had an actual. What I mean by we're there, he actually has the body created, which is first step.
You're talking about Ishiguro.
Yeah.
So there was someone who at this global conference, Future Conference 2045, there was someone who actually had an avatar that moved and looked, but we're not quite there.
But just to that point, what I like about Dimitri's process, though, is that he talks about the second step being, just keeping the brain alive, which the brain, again, could have a longer lifespan than the body if it was supported fully. So then we could extend life potentially in 15 years. So it's logical.
I want to talk to Dr. Hurtak, who's studied consciousness, who's like really one of the foremost teachers. Is it possible, in terms of consciousness, what Una is saying, to really, in your opinion, have a brain that is
a substrate?
Yeah, substrate of artificial.
Well, this is the big debate at Caltech. Christopher Koch and colleagues from United States and Germany are looking at the possibility that certain levels of consciousness can be transferable through microengineering. 4 decades ago, my colleagues at Stanford Research Institute in Silicon Valley, California, were working with 6-axis robotic arms and felt that the 4th generation robots would begin to acquire the characteristics of the human being and personality. But beyond that point, people were not sure as to how much consciousness could be embedded in the technical substrates.
Now, people like Dean Radin and Bruce Lipton and some of these cutting-edge biologists saying consciousness is not actually contained in the brain, Lynn McTaggart. It's in the field. So the brain's a receiver. It's like, and that was my problem with the conference. It's like dissecting your radio and think you're going to find an announcer in there, and there's no
This is exactly the paradigm that I think we need to realize, is that even Stuart Hameroff is saying the same thing, that the brain is not the all-embracive level of consciousness, that consciousness is all the universe, the global field, the consciousness field, the local field, and that is really who we are. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't take the brain and put it into some sort of avatar type of body.
You take the mechanics of a brain.
But
no,
step
even
three
our brain
hasn't been figured out yet, and he knows that, which is why he's saying in 30 years it'll be accomplished, you know. So I think he knows that consciousness is the piece that hasn't been figured out.
I don't think we know enough yet to make an. I know Stuart for 25 years, and I met him in Japan at a molecular computing
and he
conference.
was at this conference,
right,
Stuart.
Of course, and I don't. There are other ways of explaining. I don't personally subscribe to the belief that consciousness exists as an object of any sort in isolation. I don't subscribe to that, but there's other ways of explaining consciousness through the neocortex generates its own weak but pan-cortical, across the entire cortex, electromagnetic field. And there's relatively recent research that indicates that that might be finally a way of explaining how, which was talked about at the conference, how distant areas of the brain are in synchrony. Because the speed of propagation along the axon, the nerve cell, isn't fast enough to account for it. But
because it's holistic. I mean,
the electromagnetic field can provide feedback, and it's interesting for what you were talking about because electromagnetic fields are how we can entangle particles at the quantum level. So it speaks to some of Hamerof's stuff.
But on the other side, on the more traditional side, one could also say that at least the way I receive information from the consciousness field is different from the way Stuart receives information from the consciousness field. So our brain does play a role. Consciousness not be
Where is consciousness, I think, is the question, and I don't think it's been asked. Is it in the brain?
This is a great question. Is consciousness something that comes out of the flow of sodium ions? Is it in the field relationship of the mind, both hemispheres engaged, the left and right? Is it in the all embrace of life force that we have yet to define?
Because what we want to know, basically, is can we take consciousness and put it into some type of machine to extend who we are as a personality?
Well, you would still need the receptors that we would have in our brain.
The thing that is also the case is that other research has shown that, akin to what you were saying, that the magnetic field of the Earth may be the vehicle by which the electromagnetic fields of individuals are connected and correlated. And this is powerful research where this individual isolated the magnetic fields for two individuals in isolated rooms with a device that generated a local field. And one individual was shown a random bright flash. The other individual, her brain recorded a response, and even she occasionally saw one, even though there was no flash in her isolated room. So that's very early evidence for the kind of thing you're talking about.
So what are you saying, Desiree, as far as
I'm saying that I'm going along with everybody, but saying that the field of consciousness is greater, but our brain, and each one is different, are unique receptors for the consciousness field. So that you could keep my brain alive, and I will still be able to receive from the consciousness field the way I do right now.
Well, this goes along with that experiment with the rat. Tell us about what was talked about at the conference with the rat was sent thoughts from another rat.
Well, I think he transferred memory from one rat, Berger, Thomas Berger, I think was the gentleman's name.
One rat to another.
But specifically what he did was he determined what he called space-time codes that the brain was using to transform perceptions into short-term memory and then stepwise into long-term memory codes. And then he replicated those on a VLSI chip, which he then interfaced in place of the hippocampal function. And he found
he invented a chip
that forms long-term memories, and that then those codes could be placed in another rat, and they would have the memories that he synthetically created for them.
It's Kurzweil's thing of reverse engineering the brain and understanding the mapping within the brain. It makes that even more possible that you can recreate a brain, but then its consciousness is outside the brain.
They did the experiment. They did it, and talk about, and then we'll get to your comments, Dr. Hurta. They did the experiment. So
he just touched on it, that I think he replaced, as you're saying, exactly that. But that that then they tested it, and that rat had assumed the long-term memory of the other rat.
So they took like a memory of one rat, they encoded it on a chip, they put that chip in another rat, and that other rat had the memory of the first rat?
In essence, it's more complicated than that, of course, but yeah, in essence, that's what happened.
Some of our research also goes to something maybe more practical, and this is, although controversial, is for organ transplants. There's been instances when there's been heart transplants or liver transplants that the person who receives that transplant starts having different scenarios than what they had before, either a likeness for food.
Well, in the Heart's Code by Purcell, he said the little girl received the heart from another little girl who was murdered, was able to identify the murder. But I mean, because there's a genetic memory as well.
No,
Have you
but
read
see,
the Heart's Code?
Well, I haven't read that, but genetics do play a role in memory formation. Period. I mean, there's RNA and there's molecular formation of memories in the substrate. But not only well, okay. I tend to go on and on.
Okay, let me hear from Dr. Hertog because
I'm holding a very interesting news release: robot with living brain created in the U.S. This is some research that was done at Northwestern by Dr. Musa Ivaldi some years ago, saying that with the use of brain coordinates, prosthetic systems can be evolved. We're moving into a whole age of cyborg devices, and that can be implanted in the human system. Ultimately, through the brain waves, we can control and levitate objects at a distance at our convenience if we're localized and not able to move from object to object or room to room. We can still do this through the power of how our brain waves can be coordinated.
Really? That's
University of Minnesota has just released this data where they've been training people to focus on a particular object. There's certain electrodes that are taking place, and they're able to raise and lower things like ping pong balls.
How do they do that?
Well, this is all part of a vibratory
There's
connection.
electrodes in the person's brain, and they're looking at a ping. Is there anything on the ping pong ball?
The ping pong ball is connected with a substrate of memory that then the person who is trained is able to interact with.
Yes, there's also electrodes there, but they're able to send the signal. There's no connection between the two.
So for paralysis, this is huge, or for,
That's right. Basically, what it is, they were talking about at the conference quite a bit about brain-machine interfaces and so on. And the goal, as was stated, is to have not a complex of heavy devices and cables running, and there's infection possible when something penetrates the skull and all of that, but to have an embedded, very lightweight, probably a conducting polymer of some sort that would be biocompatible, so then it wouldn't cause infections, you wouldn't have to open up the skull except for the initial insert, and then that could communicate outside of the brain and receive and send.
So that's his, again, back to that second phase, that avatar to brain connection it would be possible based on that alone, right? I mean, that phase 2 is possible, already.
Do you have something else to say about this? Because
I'm intrigued, of course, with the concept of avatar, having worked with Vince Pace, who developed a technology that was used for the Avatar movie, and given the idea of how the mind of the audience collectively, of course, can be respatialized, and one can go into scenes and situations that would not normally be possible a few years ago. That we are entering into a phase of extended eyesight with electronic eyes and ears. We're really working on the possibility of a global mind, a global brain, some would say, with the axons and dendrites being interconnected in very unique ways.
But let me go into another slightly different direction, including what you said, is that the sense we've become obsessed with machines, And I think there's so much more to the biology that we have, and maybe biology is in a sense mechanical, but we haven't even tapped our own facilities of brain consciousness, which I think is the work of Dr. Hertog, Dr. JJ, and Desiree Hertog.
No, that's a very good point, because the emerging field of embodied cognition. Right now,
what does that mean?
It means that thinking, memory, and other psychological and even neural-related functions are occurring throughout the body, which is what reminded me of it when you're saying that the person with the heart transplant has memories and experiences from the donor. And we know about muscle memory. You learn to ride a bike. There's muscle memory involved. You're not doing it with your cortex at all anymore after you learn it. But even if you touch a hot surface and pull away, that doesn't even get to the brain. It goes up the afferent nerve into the spinal cord and back immediately and directly to the muscle that pulls it away. So there is knowledge and wisdom in the body in itself.
As a matter of fact, Dr. Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona did some studies where there was organs that were transplanted, and the recipient has acquired, quote unquote, the taste were certain foods that normally were not there, but were in the organ of the donor.
Right.
So we have now case studies that are showing that we're going into what we will call a transhuman phase of programming ourselves, programming our own DNA, programming our own potential to see that we can
be. Do you
be
think it's an evolutionary
connected.
thing?
I do feel this is an evolutionary leap that we're going into.
But we need to understand biology as mechanism, and I don't think we understand the real mechanism of biology. Biology is a machine, but in a very advanced understanding.
Well, that's what's interesting about Stuart Hamroff's literature, because he talks about the microtubules, which are all over your body, and that these microtubules are actually able to be receptor sites. I think the blood itself is a receptor site. I think we have many more receptor sites than just the neurons in our brain.
Right. But that's my problem with Kurzweil. It's very primitive compared to what nature actually is capable of.
When it comes to
well,
consciousness, for sure, there is that gaping.
That's
there is
true.
a gaping.
And that's what I mentioned about it was synthetic biology before. You're familiar with Craig Ventnor's work?
Yes,
right?
Of course.
Okay.
I'm not familiar. What does he say?
He did two things. The first thing, he took two segments of two genomes from different bacteria, spliced them, and that then expressed into what's called phenotype, the body form of a new bacterium. But then he took the next step, and they devised a completely synthetic genomic structure, and that became a living, reproducing artificial life form for the first time.
Oh, really?
So we're starting to understand that first, two things that are important. First, the genome is not a machine. I mean, when Watson and Crick discovered the structure, they thought it was machine-like, deterministic. It's not. It modifies itself. It can incorporate genes from other species. There are introns, extrons. There are processes where one set of sequence of genes can silence another from even expressing itself. So it's very, very complex, and as we learn that, we're getting to the kinds of things that we're talking about.
Is there two thought processes? So is it like one that's very much about the mechanics, the engineering, the Dimitris, the Kurzweils of the world, and then genome engineering is something that's almost a different thread?
They are moving together.
Yeah.
That is the point.
Because one of the things they did is they put two strands of DNA together in a petri dish, and they actually started coming together. It seems that one could say it's the hydrophobic relationship or electromagnetically based, but there seems to be some sort of energy connected with there that we haven't been able to define.
I think the energy key is what is missing in biology and Kurzweil. I think you, Dr. Hertog, I want to ask you specifically, because you've seen the new paradigms, and I think what people hear, no offense, is that we're still in a mechanistic age, and I think we're in that with the age of machines, and we haven't graduated yet because we're still thinking machines.
We're breaking through the biotechnical shell into something of a new reality. We've had the privilege, Desiree and I, to work with Dr. Peter Garayev from the University of Moscow and his group looking at the human organism as a biotransducer receiving energy inputs, along with that information that actually changes what he calls the DNA waveform. In other words, we are more than human bodies anatomically structured as we see ourselves in normal conditions. In a different way, we are also biotransducers. We are energy collectors. And through this process, it is possible to, shall we say, amplify certain signal-noise relationships or perceptual apparatus relationships where we receive quantum levels of information that can allow certain individuals to take off and do things of quote-unquote mind over matter meta-science that we're now beginning to define.
Like what? Sorry. What
well, this is the Uri Geller effect that we studied at Stanford Research Institute.
Tell her about that.
Well, we had a situation where Naval Research Intelligence and very pristine American engineering experts were looking at this young Israeli who had this ability to bend forks and spoons by the power of the mind, not through sleight of hand or through physical gimmicks, but situations under rigorous studies that have now been released under a special relationship with Dr. Russell Targ, who has allowed his film studies privately conducted in the early 70s to be released worldwide. In short, there are others that have been studied in other parts of the world by the Russians, by the Brits, showing certain individuals have the ability to go beyond the normal biological circuits and to tap into a higher source of energy.
And that's really, I love that, because there are two things that are really related that are very important. One is, I'm assuming all of us at this table know about the remote viewing work that was done both here and in the Soviet Union.
I've interviewed everybody on that.
I'm editing actually the papers of those studies by Elizabeth Targ, as well as Elizabeth Rauscher, one of the top female mathematicians in the world. And this information will be available very, very shortly.
And remote viewing is the ability to project your consciousness in another place and to perceive that. And you can explain that from the Kurzweil paradigm.
Yeah, and I don't mean to represent
Kurzweil's
views at all, because I'm sure and there's people who can do that a lot better. But I do think there's kind of an East versus West way of looking at consciousness as well. And the West very much contained within the body, which is where this kind of idea of keeping it very robotic, etc., is coming from. And then the East has a very different view, which is that consciousness is outside the body.
No, that's a really good point, and I think,
and it is a good point, and it shows that our conception, not just of everything being mechanistic and deterministic, which the quantum universe shows that in fact it's not the case. It's the universe at its fundamental structure is probabilistic at best. But not only that, that we evolved to see ourselves in the world as inside and outside. And that there's a lot that can be said that points to that being illusory in many ways as well.
Well, how would you go from there, Desiree? Because you really bridge East and West, and you bridge technology and mysticism.
Both sides are real and valid. I mean, when you see people being able to, with stem cells, grow back a finger or a fingernail or whatever, this is incredible stuff that even the Army is working on and funding.
But how do we merge those two to go into the future with something like original here?
The more research one does, the more, and many of these scientists are starting to see that it's not just the mechanisms. There is a wave field, and then in a certain sense, our physical reality is only concretized matter. That beyond that, and I like where Dimitri goes, is that eventually we'll evolve into kind of more of a light consciousness, a light presence. So that, and where some of the scientists and the people from the East are going is starting from this light presence coming down into matter. We're going from matter back into the light consciousness.
So Desiree, you're using light as superluminal, luminal, or subluminal?
Well, the same thing that we're all talking about, that eventually we don't need the solid matter as much as we need really the consciousness field. And
so maybe instead of transplanting the brain, you could transplant the conscious field into an avatar and have that vibration. And maybe that's what Kurzweil and Dimitri are not seeing yet.
I think that's possible.
I think everybody's walking in the same direction.
But I think the conscious field, to me, this consciousness field would be something that would be more pervasive. It wouldn't necessarily be an inside-outside kind of phenomenon. It would be something that might be an intrinsic part of space-time. That's not clear to me yet. I'm not sure about that.
We're forever beings. I just want to say thank you all. This is Alan Steinfeld for New Realities. We'll be picking up this conversation at some point. If you want to reach me, go to my website, newrealities.com. You can email me at newrealities@earthlink.net. Thanks. Well, that was an interesting conversation. I think a lot of points were brought out that people, there's no conclusions, but people can be stimulated to think. Do you think that's happened, Desiree?
That's everything.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thanks.